Okay, so it's 2 minutes past 5. Welcome everybody. Welcome Danny. Welcome to the team of Experts Live and all our participants. Today we're gonna do something about and around the PowerShell remoting capability. Let's do some housekeeping at the beginning. We will record this session, so if you don't want to be on a recording, just leave the session now and you can watch it later on. We will publish it at expertslive.at, also with audio, video, and so on. And please, during the presentation, if you don't have to say anything, turn off your microphone so that we don't disturb our presenters. Just a short note on events. There will be the Great Experts Live Austria conference on the 26th of June. So this is actually next week in Linz, so in the heart of Austria. There are still tickets available. If you're interested, go to expertslive.at. We have 3 tracks, infrastructure, maybe correct me, Helmut, security and AI, and really interesting speakers. So if you find time, join it. Our next PowerShell user group cafe will be in Q3. We don't have a fixed date yet, but we probably have a speaker. This is Baki Dai. He's working at Hilti. And Baki is educating the next generation of IT admins, so Lehrlinge. I honestly don't know the expression in English. So people really coming after 9 years of school and learning IT, and they learn PowerShell with him. And I'm very interested in what he teaches them and what we can learn from his experience. So then we start the recording, or maybe somebody did already. If not, I'm going to do this now. Wonderful. Recording started. Maybe a short audio check with Danny. Can you unmute your microphone, please?
I'm here.
That's
Can you all
great.
hear me?
It's working.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So today we're gonna hear something about the future of PowerShell remoting. Danny Maertens is from the PowerShell engineering team dealing with PowerShell remoting and maybe other stuff. I don't know. You're gonna present yourself afterwards. We are happy to have you here. That's really great. And I'm keen on hearing on what's going on. So the stage is yours. Have fun.
Great. Well, thanks for the quick intro. Yeah, I'm Danny Maertens. I'm one of the PMs on the PowerShell team. I specifically focus on SSH and anything really related to SSH for Azure and for Windows. Obviously that includes things like PowerShell remoting. That includes things like the SSH that ships in box in Windows. That includes things like connecting to Azure VMs or storage accounts and things like that. So I'm happy to answer any and all questions there. Or if there's any really broader questions kind of in the PowerShell or command line space, certainly send them in chat and I can point you to the right direction or try to do my best to answer them. But today,
That's great. Just about the questions, maybe let's take another 30 minutes or so for presentation. Maybe if somebody has questions, please post it in the chat. If it's worth discussing it verbally, then we simply jump in and interrupt you.
Perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
great.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm thinking something pretty informal for today. I don't have slides because I figured that's not why I'm really here for you all. It's not to do really a sales pitch. It's really just to show you kind of what we have, what's going on, and talk about why you might want to think about SSH and how that really relates to WinRM and RDP and things like that. And so what we're looking at for kind of the next, I'd say 5 to 10 years for, I'd say, remoting for Windows at least, and including that is PowerShell, is really looking at a transition away from WinRM and RDP-based remoting onto something that's a little bit more auditable and secure. And our path forward for that is SSH or other things that are based on SSH remoting. You might be familiar like Windows Admin Center or WAC. WAC is something that is a more auditable implementation on top of WinRM, just because that's backed with PowerShell commands. and they're looking at moving to SSH. And so we're at this stage where we have WinRM, and that's existed in Windows for, honestly, I don't know. I think it's since, I'd say Windows 7, I think. And that's not really in any new feature development. It's really only in servicing. Our team used to own WinRM, but there's not any new feature development on that remoting technology. And then you also have RDP, which gives you obviously a GUI-based session, but that's not really auditable. And so you can't go and audit the mouse clicks when a user connects to a machine. And so if there is a security incident, how do you go and, let's say, reconcile that if you don't know it was actually performed on the machine? And so looking at kind of those two, I'd say, drawbacks or caveats to other, I'd say, prevalent forms of remoting for Windows, SSH is really the path forward, at least on the PowerShell side, and kind of from a broader Windows and Microsoft space. If you look at kind of the industry all up, SSH has long been industry standard. If you're connecting to a Unix machine, a networking device, IoT device, etc., all of that is going to be based on SSH remoting, where Windows is really just the exception where you use WinRM or RDP. And so we're looking at kind of the industry as a whole and saying, yes, SSH is really the best protocol to transition to. Okay, so that was kind of just a lot to kind of jump in right off the bat, but I think what the best is to just say, how do we go and set up PowerShell remoting? How do we set up PowerShell remoting for an Azure machine, for an Arc machine? How many people here are familiar with Arc? You can just do like the thumbs up reaction or something like that. Okay, so let's just say about half. So Azure Arc, the way I think about it is obviously Microsoft has the Azure ecospace, and where you have your cloud resources and those exist within Azure. Arc is really bringing the existing management plane for Azure resources, but to non-Azure hardware. And so that could be something where it's a VM that's running locally, that could be a Kubernetes cluster that's running in your data center, that could be a machine that's in AWS or GCP. And so it's really about bringing that existing management ecosystem onto machines that might not necessarily be kind of natively within Azure. And so the goal is to create an environment where you don't necessarily have to have all of your resources in the same place, or really in the to have the same management capabilities and uniform kind of like pane of glass to view and manage those resources. So actually, let's just kind of jump in and look at what's new, and we can kind of go through enablement and things like that. So on my machine, I have let me share my screen because that is important. I'm going to assume that the one hand up now is still for me asking who all is familiar with Arc. So I'm going to ignore you for now, Robert, unless that's untrue. So feel free to come off mute
if there's a
that's
question, just write it in the chat. We collect it.
Okay. All right, Len, let me get you all pulled back up. So bear with me for 1 second as I just shift things around on my screens. Okay, so I have a VM here. I'm just gonna kind of revert it back to a previous state so it's clean for you all. And I'll do one thing because I already have the machine connected to Arc. So let me go and delete that in Arc. So just go to the Azure portal. Again, this is just because I didn't know who all would be familiar, so I wanted to have different options on where to do our demo from. So let me just get us to a clean start. and delete. Okay. So we'll assume that goes. So here I just have on Hyper-V. This is a Windows Server 2025 build. If you all have been watching kind of the Windows Insider for server, there's already some insider builds for Windows Server 2025. So if you are a Windows Insider, feel free to go and try that out. One of the really great things about Windows Server 2025 is that SSH is being included by default. You might be familiar historically, SSH is shipped as a feature on demand within Windows. And so basically what that means is when you go into like the optional features, you can find OpenSSH there, and then you have to download it, but it's really considered kind of inbox still, but it's not really inbox because you have to do the download, and it's just kind of a convoluted kind of mess of how does it actually live there, what if you have an air-gapped environment, it's still kind of a pain to get it on the machine. But just having it natively in box is kind of the next step for us, right? And so to start, it's a off by default. That is the same way that RDP ships a Windows Server. And so this is a clean Windows Server build. You can see I like Server Manager UI here. By default, remote management, which is WinRM, comes enabled, and that's because a lot of Windows processes require WinRM still under the covers, so that comes enabled by default. Remote desktop, RDP is disabled, and then we all have also now added a remote SSH option here. And so enabling SSH is as simple as clicking the disabled. Here, it will open a PowerShell script. This is a preview build, so there's not the prompt here for when it runs, but there will be a prompt for the actual release, so you don't have a random terminal window opening and closing with no extra information, which is never good. And then there's also still the other ways of enabling SSH with whether start service or unattended XML or group policy, things like that. And so great. So now if I just like click off and back, you should see that it hasn't updated. There it goes, enabled. So now remote SSH is enabled. We can go and see like start services enabled, or if we look at the services on this machine, let's see. Going slow. So if we just do like was it like get service name SSHD, oops, HD. There you go. So now we have SSHD, which is server side component for OpenSSH is running. So pretty simple. By default, that's only going to be listening on port 22 only for our executable and only within your private network. So our idea here is we want to be the most secure by default as possible. We want to make sure that you say like, hey, if you click this button, you're not exposing port 22 to the internet open just off the bat. That's absolutely not the case. It's only to port 22, only on our executable, and only within your private network. That is all modifiable by an admin. Okay, so great. So we have SSH enabled on this machine. I also talked about Arc a little bit. I'm going to be showing that off a little bit today, just because a lot of extra value added to that, and it makes for nice demos, and it can really get a very clean experience for connecting for your machine. So let's just do it today. Here there's an Arc onboarding wizard. It's a natively within Windows. You can also go and get an install script from the Azure portal or get something that you can deploy at scale. Here I'm just onboarding one machine, so we'll just go through the native wizard. And let me just do my auth real quick. Okay. So great, I've just authenticated to Azure, and now I'm just going to go and select basically my tenant, resource group, subscription, etc. to say, where do I want this machine to live? We'll throw it in that demo again, and I'm in WestUS 3. Okay. So basically what this is doing is installing an agent on your box. If you're familiar with really how Azure works, there is a host and a host agent that lives on all those machines. We need some way of being able to talk to that machine from basically the Azure service plane. The way this works is it doesn't require any really new inbound ports on your machine. You get access to that machine without, let's say, a public-facing internet connection. It all works on basically an outbound connection with Azure Relay. It's just called like a reverse proxy. And we can go into that if folks need to at the end. So now that has flipped to enabled. And if I actually go back to that window here on the resource, you can see it was gone. It's like Windows Server 2025. If we just do a refresh, maybe we need to do a full page refresh. Let's see. Okay, so we can see that server is there now. Okay, great. So we have the machine connected. We have it kind of enabled in Arc. What do we do from there? So I'm just going to close out of all of this because this isn't what we want anymore. We'll switch over to a PowerShell window. Is that big enough for everyone? I'm going to assume yes, or wait for a thumbs up in the chat or something. Great. Okay. So here I just have a local, I'd say, PowerShell window. For context, if it's a blue prompt, I am on my client machine. Obviously, I work on remoting and I connect to a lot of different machines and I collect, especially for demos. So if it's a blue prompt, you know I'm on my local client. White prompts will be remote Windows machines. Green prompts are remote Linux machines. So that's really how we're going to make the differentiations, just so it's a little bit easier to follow, especially because when I connect to a Windows machine, a lot of times it still says users and then my Microsoft email. So it's just how you know quickly that where we are. Okay, so now I have a machine in Azure that's really on-prem. So I have an Azure Arc machine. I have my Arc-enabled server that's running on Hyper-V. I've connected that to Azure, and I can go and connect to that machine. And so I can say something like enter AZVM, and we'll just use our auto-completion because that makes things a lot quicker for you all. And so here we can say, yep, I'm going to say enter my Azure VM. Resource group is demo, name of the machine, Windows Server 25, and I'm going to connect as the admin. And so run this. And actually, it's probably going to yell at me, and I can explain to you why. Yep. So right now, it's yelling at me because this is a new machine, and it's saying, hey, you've never connected to this machine before over Arc. And so what I haven't explained up to this point is just like I mentioned how the Arc agent doesn't require an inbound port, neither does connecting with the enter AZVM command if it's an Arc-enabled machine. And so here, I'm not going through any kind of, I'd say, hidden networking on my device. I'm connecting over the internet without a public IP address. And so what you can kind of imagine is I might have a machine that is halfway across the world, and I can still go and connect to that machine without having any public inbound ports to that machine. This is that prompt to say, yeah, we're not really looking if port 22 is open on this device, but you're an admin and would you like to enable it? And here it's yelling at me because it's taking longer to set up than it thought it would. So it's saying, hey, do you really want to allow port 22 connections on this machine? You're the admin, so does that work, right? And I'm saying, yes, I want that to work. Then we had, which is up to this point, then we had some just delays that caused it to do a retry. And then something SSH related happened and said, hey, you're trying to connect to a machine and we've already connected to this machine before and something looks different. And so if you're familiar with SSH, when the first time you connect and it says, hey, is this the machine you want to connect to? Is that real? Yes or no? And everyone just types in yes and no one actually validates. I've said yes to the machine with this name before, and now it's yelling at me. So we just need to go into basically our known hosts file and delete our entry there. So give me 1 second, and I can do that. And let's see. Again, you see all the things that I normally do for my my prepped, because we were starting from the beginning. And so here, I'll just show you. On Windows, we have a .ssh file and a known host file. And if you open up that known host file, which you can see, where is it? Oh, this code. You have this known host file, which basically says, hey, here's the machine with the name Windows Server 2025, and here's the associated, say, like fingerprint with that. We just delete that, save it again, and we will rerun our command. And this time it won't yell at us. And so here's that as a prompt, yes or no, that I was talking about before. Is this the machine you actually want to connect to, yes or no? Does anyone actually ever say no or validate the fingerprint for this machine, or does everyone just type yes? How about this? If someone says no or validates their fingerprint, raise your hand.
Well, actually, I guess when you want to connect to a machine, you either have a problem or you want to do something. So
Yeah.
why should we do no?
So the no for here is really, in my opinion, this is the biggest vulnerability within SSH, is a man in the middle attack and saying exactly what just happened to me. Hey, I've gone in and I've changed that known host, or I've gone and changed the fingerprint, or I changed the name of the machine. And when I connect to a machine I think is the machine I'm wanting to connect to, it's not actually that machine. And so here I said yes, but I didn't do any validation that this machine is the one I actually want to connect to. So I'm just curious for, it looks like only Michael did validation. And so this is something that we're looking at, like, oh, is there ways for us to automatically validate this for you? So I just like to get a kind of a quick, I'd say, gauge of how many people do this versus not do it. Okay, but moving on from there, I'll just put in my password, and you can say like, yep, now I'm on as an admin on this box. And I know it might not look like that much, but it's actually, I'd say, a really interesting way that we're connected, because again, there's no public IP address required for this machine. And so even if I go into like the Azure portal and I go back to that resource, and I say we have Cloud Shell in the portal, or we also have like the connect option in the browser, right? And if I say like, hey, I have this machine, I want to connect to it with a password, I'm going to connect it as the administrator, and I'm just going to say connect in browser, and that can connect securely without a public IP address. And this is just connecting to the machine that's running on my local box, right? And so what this really enables you is, especially with Cloud Shell, you can go from any machine, at least that you have a browser on, and you can authenticate into Azure, into any machine. And so what I do is I have my personal desktop that just sits right there, onboarded into Arc. And so now, even if I'm not home, or if I'm not, I'd say, oh, there's some, I'd say, remnants here, and let's just give Cloud Shell a restart. Even if I'm not home, or I don't have a VPN set up, or I don't want a VPN for my whole network, if I just really want to be able to get into one box, I can onboard that machine into Arc, and I can connect securely really from any machine. And so let's just try that again, because something wonky happened here. So this is just the equivalent command of what I just ran, but with Azure PowerShell, or with Azure CLI, excuse me. And it's going to say the same thing, like, yes, I want to connect to this machine, do my password, get the password right, hopefully. Well, we'll try it again.
Yeah, password demo help.
Oh man, we'll wait till I put a key on it and then we'll connect. How about that? Okay. So anyway, either way on that connection, I'm getting prompted for that password, so you know I've connected the machine. I'm just failing, having clumsy fingers on the keyboard. So anyway, so okay, so I've connected to this machine. What do I really do now, right? So, oops, clicked the wrong. I don't want that. So now that I've connected on this box, right? I've connected with an SSH connection, right? And you can see I showed you before that SSH is running on this box, but I'm still just kind of connecting with a standard SSH remoting kind of connectivity. There's not really anything special about that. I mean, yes, we're using the Enter AZ VM, but this really isn't PowerShell remoting, right? So all we've done now is set up, I'd say, very basic, very basic I'd say SSH connectivity to the machine. And so how do we go and kind of really enable the rest of that, right? At this point, once you have like the enter AZ VM, you can do things like export AZ SSH config if you want to use things like SFTP or SCP, or if you use Ansible. So anything that I say leverages just like a native SSH connection, you can then, I'd say, connect using this kind of same IP-less connectivity. And so here you just have to supply it like a config file. Let's just go into like demo.config. And so basically it's taking all of that information about the SSH connections. You can see like the host, where this is like my resource group and the actual machine I'm going to connect as, and my login, and then really under the covers to give the IP-less connection, we're doing some SSH proxying, which is what you see here. It's writing all that information into an SSH config file, just like a user-side settings file for a connection. And so I can say something like SSH, give it a file, and say like demo.config. And now I just have to supply like what machine I'm going to connect to. And I'm saying my resource group demo, the machine I want is Win Server 25, and I want to connect as administrator, right? And so now I can go and get that same connectivity, but just over a native SSH command. Come on, computer. I might have frozen my window. Huh, there we go. Let's just start that again. There's some questions in here. Let's see.
Yeah, it was my question. I mean, the concept of a PS session, which I could establish and then use for remoting, is this also valid for an SSH environment?
Yes. So we'll get to that point. So essentially, for PowerShell remoting, whenever you're, I'd say, creating that session, you say something like new PS session, computer name, and the name of your computer. The only thing you want to change, if you want to say to PowerShell, is like, yeah, I want to use SSH connectivity versus WinRM, is instead of it being I'd say a computer name parameter, it's a host name parameter, right? And so if we say like a new PS session, you can see here, we'll get to this later, but all I have here is the host name parameter and giving it that kind of that same information, right? And so yes, you can do PowerShell remoting, and we will get to that a little bit later. For some reason, it's not SSH. There it goes. Okay, did something weird. So here I can use native SSH. Got my password right that time, and I'm back on that machine. Okay, so I can use native SSH, I can use SFTP, but each time I keep messing up my password. So let's like throw a key on that device, right? And so we look at the different forms of authentication that are really supported for SSH. There's username and password, which is what I've been showing thus far. There's also SSH keys. And then if it's an Azure attached device, meaning it's a Azure VM or an Azure Arc machine, We also support an Entra ID or AAD-based login. Right now, that's only for Linux machines, but that'll be coming for Windows machines as well. But basically, that just lets you not have to create a user account on a machine. You just connect with your, it's a Azure identity. But this is a Windows machine, so let's just set up a key on that on the box. So I already have a key that I already use. Perfect. And so I just store it here. It's kind of the default one that I have for SSH. So I can get that content on my key. And then there's actually, I have a kind of remote PowerShell little thing that I like to run to deploy that key. But I know I pasted it here, but we'll go through it just so you know that what we're actually doing. So basically I'm saying I want to execute some remote PowerShell. I want to start PowerShell. I'm going to add some content to my administrator's authorized keys file. The value of that is keys. And then I'm going to just basically change some to execution permissions here and basically say, yeah, I want administrator rights and things like that. And so I'll say like, yes, that's the remote PowerShell I want. And then I can take that same SSH command I had before, just added some remote PowerShell at the end and execute. And so hopefully do a password for the last time. Great, got that right. And so now it said like, yeah, I've successfully run this one file, nothing's failed. And so now if I go and connect to that same machine, hopefully I don't get prompted for a password because I have that key in my box. So great, no password there. So we have a key set up. And so now how do we go and do PowerShell remoting, right? At least over SSH, right? So PowerShell remoting over SSH is only supported on, I'd say, PowerShell core versions. And the only supported versions of that are PowerShell 7. I think we go back to 7.2 right now. So you need to be on PowerShell 7 in order to do PowerShell remoting over SSH. And so let's set that up. So let's just connect back to that box again. So I'm back on my remote machine. Again, white prompt, you can know I'm on the remote machine. And this is a Windows Server 2025 machine, as I mentioned before. Actually, one of the other really nice things about Windows Server 2025 is WinGit is there installed by default. And so WinGit is available natively on Windows Server. And in terms of just needing to get the whole string, I've already set up my WinGit command. Here, I've also already installed this MSI on the machine, but I haven't set it up just for purposes of demo and downloading speed. But here I can do a WinGit install. In this case, you can see I'm installing it from a local package. You don't necessarily need to do that on your box. You can do a download from a remote source. So, yep, WinGit's there on box. I'm saying install PowerShell 7. And we'll wait for that to finish. This is much faster than if we had to do the download because I don't have great internet speed in my apartment. And really behind the scenes, this machine is in my apartment still. So bear with me on the slightly less slow install.
Until that's finished installing, let me just wrap up and do a summary. So we heard on Windows Server 2025 is SSH installed by default. We heard about the Azure Arc, and now we do some PowerShell remoting. Just need to look at the time. So we have around 10 to 15 minutes left. I hope that's okay.
I will finish imminently. I'll go quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't
so
rush.
Here you can see now I have PowerShell 7 installed. Great, it's there. We'll do some copy and pasting of just some other stuff just to make it quicker. But here basically saying, yep, I want to set my default shell. Your default shell is a OS setting, not an SSH setting or anything like that. So basically I'm saying, yep, I want my default shell to be the file path to PowerShell 7. Great, we're going to do that. That's just a nicety. It's not a requirement. So now I have PowerShell 7 on this box, but if I exit out of here, out of PowerShell, exit out of my session, great, I have PowerShell 7. Let's do the enter PS session. And we'll say host name, this is what we want. Actually, I don't want to spoil anything yet, so we'll just bear with me. We won't get there yet. So on SSH, we have, I'd say PowerShell 7 set up, installed. We have it set as our default shell. What we also have to do is when we go to connect to this machine, if you try to connect right now, it's going to yell at you and say, hey, you don't have, I'd say, a PowerShell subsystem for SSH. And so for SSH, it really needs to know about other executables on the box if you want to automatically go to that executable that exists for like SFTP if you're doing file transfer. If you look in your SSHD config file, so if you do like cat, actually, let's do this. So cd.ssh. Actually, we're in cd program files ls cd Microsoft. Oops. Sorry. Where are we at? Yeah, we should be there. ls-a. We're going off script now. Okay, maybe we don't.
Huh. So what are you looking for?
It's fine. I was just going to show you the SSHD config, but here we other ways we can do it. We can do this SSHD-T. So basically, this is giving us what's our running state of the SSH process. And so there's some familiar things here, like yep, we're running on port 22. Like you can only try to auth 6 times before we're going to block you, things like that. But there's also things like where are we at? Subsystem. So you can see like here, subsystem SFTP. So we need to go and add a subsystem for PowerShell. And so that's as easy as just like going into, I went to program files. That's my issue. You going into like your program data, and then finding your SSHD config. So cd.ssh, and then like here you have SSHD config. And so that's going, and you need to change this file and add a subsystem. So here I've got just little some PowerShell scripts that will do that for me. So let's just go back to our home directory. So we'll paste this in. Basically what we're doing here is getting our path to the config file, getting that content, finding the other subsystems, adding some new content that says, yeah, I want a PowerShell subsystem, and rewriting that file. I understand that this is hard to follow, and all of this is in our public documentation. And this is kind of one of the points of this talk, is to say like, yeah, setting up SSH for PowerShell and Windows remoting is still really hard, And so if this seems daunting or it seems like a really big process, like, yes, that is the case. So don't think that, don't be surprised if that's what you're thinking about now. All right, so great. I've restarted the SSH service. And now I can actually connect with PowerShell remoting. And so I'm going to exit out of my session. Again, you can see I'm back on my local box with the blue prompt. And so I'm going to go and connect to this machine. And so as I showed before, we have the enter PS session. We can say host name. And in this case, my machine is Windows Server 25. And we have that information. I don't need to supply an IP address because we've done something with our SSHD config with that export earlier. I'm going to connect as a username, being an administrator, and I'm going to try to connect. And this is going to fail because for connecting to an ARC machine, you have to have that proxy information. And so if we looked back at that export, and we'll kill this because it's just going to time out. If we looked back at that export AZSH config file and we just run it again here, you can see it says yeah, here's my host name, and the user is written out here, but we don't really have a good way of getting this proxy command, right? And so for SSH, there's a lot of different parameter options, right? So there's proxy commands, there's tunneling options, there's certificate options, there's I'd say host name and user options, right? And so there's not we don't have a parameter for all of those options within, I'd say, the enter PS session. So I can't go here and say like proxy, right? Nothing's going to show up there for proxy. But we do have, I'd say, an options parameter, right? And so here I can build out basically a splat of all the options I want. And so here you can say like, yes, I have a proxy command. I have a path to the proxy, and I pass like the information that I want for that proxy. And so now I can take that same command that I had before that was failing. I can add that options back in, which is really just telling it that proxy information. Again, very complicated, but now I'll be able to connect. And so now this is a PowerShell remoting session. I am on that box with a new PS session. So if I exit back out of here, right, I can do things like that's like a new PS session and put it on a variable or put it on a new session name. And so I can say like get PS session. You can see like, yeah, I've done this a few different times and there's a few that are broken, but we have the one that's open, right? And so I can do anything here that I want with this session, right? Like I can do an enter PS session, I can do an invoke command, etc., right? Great. So now we're at the point where we have, I'd say, standard PowerShell remoting. I also have, I'd say, 2 VMs set up in my resource group. And so if I flip back over to my Azure window, you can see here I have 2 different virtual machines, one that's a Ubuntu 22 machine and one Server 22 machine, where I have both of those, I'd say, machines already set up. And I also have like a little set of commands I run to basically put those into PowerShell sessions. So basically, I'm just getting those VMs, getting their public IP addresses in the case for my Azure machines, setting that to, I'd say, a new session with their VM name as the session name. And so now if I do that same, I'd say get PS session, you can see I have, I'd say, SSH connectivity sessions to both Windows Server 2025, an Ubuntu machine, and a Windows Server 2022, where I've installed SSH via the optional features, all set up. And these can be treated as any other, I'd say, standard PowerShell remoting session. Okay, great. So at this point, we've onboarded a machine to Arc. We've enabled it into SSH, which those 2 steps are pretty quick, right? If you want just raw SSH connectivity, it's quickly there, right? The more convoluted process is setting up the key, setting up PowerShell remoting for SSH, and those are just kind of remnants of this is a multi-phase, I'd say, adoption process for SSH. And I kind of think of it as, let's just say, 5 stages, where the first stage is, yeah, we have SSH and it works on Windows, right? And we've been at that point for a while. Step 2 is we're there by default in the box. We just got to step 2, right? And part of step 2 is probably having PowerShell 7 in box, right? And we know that people want that and we're working on it, right? And so step 3 is having that all clean and I can just go and do a new PS session right from the start, right? And step 3 is having that ready and having probably internal teams start to transition off of WinRM onto SSH. We're already in talks with some teams on building that transition, and teams internally are building on top of SSH, not WinRM. And then 4 is saying, yep, this is what we want, I'd say, for the foreseeable future. Don't use WinRM anymore at all. And then 5 would probably be removing WinRM. I don't think we'll ever get to step 5. The way I think about it is WinRM is kind of like CMD, right? It's always going to be there. There's always going to be some process that's going to require it behind the scenes. But you can keep using CMD, or you can update and use, I'd say, PowerShell, or you can update and use PowerShell 7, right? And it's that concept of, yeah, there's always going to be some legacy option within Windows, just kind of the nature of how Windows is and the behemoth that it is. But there is, I'd say, latest and greatest options that are there and supported. Okay, so we've got this all set up. I did talk about wanting to use WinRM versus RDP versus SSH. If you're not fully ready to do I'd say groups turn off RDP or turn off WinRM. SSH supports arbitrary port tunneling, right? So if you want to say, I want to forward my traffic from RDP on this machine to a remote machine and make it look like an RDP session on that remote machine, then yeah, we can do that with SSH remoting. And so if I take like the same like enter azvm command that I had before, we realize that people need support for RDP, and that's probably not going to go away anytime soon on Windows. We added an RDP parameter. And so I can say enter azvm, supply that resource group, supply SSH, say RDP. I didn't open RDP on this box at all, right? So it's gonna connect with SSH. So basically what this is doing, it's creating an SSH tunnel. And on that SSH tunnel, it's gonna create an RDP session. So what you didn't see is it popped up on my other monitor. So it's like, hey, I can't connect to this machine, right? And that's the same reason that we had to, how we went and turned on SSH at the beginning? We haven't turned on RDP on this box. So if I connect back to this machine, I have just a PowerShell command to run, basically just saying like, yes, I want to turn on RDP. That's what this is doing. So I'll run this command, turn on basically the ability to remote desktop into this machine, go back, run that same command. And again, here it's creating an SSH connection. You can see it says like, hey, this is running on my client, SSH for Windows 8.6. And it authenticated for SSH with my key. And over here, I get prompted to connect to this machine for RDP. RDP doesn't support a key login, so I still have to use my username and password. But now I'm going and, I messed up my password. I've had awful password typing abilities today. Okay, so now on my machine, oh, that's why. No one Hawkeye had pointed it out to me, but I was going in as the wrong user. Administrator. There you go. So put that in. Now I'm getting the kind of the familiar, do you want to connect to this machine? Yes. And I've now, come on, pull over here, please. Connected back to that same box. So you can see here, I'm connected to that same, I'd say, Windows server I was on before. Same machine. You can see the things that we've enabled. And to know we're not doing anything wonky, as you can see here on as a browser view, I'm connected at localhost. And so if I looked at my active SSH port forwarding, I would see that I have localhost port forwarded from port 53885 to port 3389 on my remote machine. And if I want to kill this session, I just come over here and I'll close I lost it. I'll close my remote session, my remote RDP session, close that, and that will kill my SSH connection as well. And so even if you're not ready to fully move off of RDP, I don't have the RDP port open on this machine. There's no public IP address, right? So I don't need to have, I'd say 3389 even exposed. I can just have, I'd say one port for SSH exposed, and I can do port forwarding with SSH to still connect over RDP. And so again, what do we go over today? Enabling SSH in Windows Server 2025. Easy as clicking a button or just saying like start service SSHD. You can enable it into Arc with the wizard or go through a PowerShell script, then connect over SSH connectivity, you're good to go there. Setting up a key, setting up PowerShell remoting. Some spots you can get hung up there, but we're working on smoothing that out over time as we get more things natively in box. And then connecting finally with, I'd say, PowerShell remoting connectivity, creating a session, and having an RDP fallback. We covered a lot, but it is a complicated scenario. So any questions, related or unrelated? And I know I probably went a little over my time, so I'm sorry.
Well, until the questions flow in, I see with a little ironic undertone, Azure Arc is the new way, a new path to go to remoting. If you want to do native SSH, you have to do a little tweaking. And I can remember I did this, I think, 4 years ago with my first steps on PowerShell core and remoting, reconfiguring the SSHD config file. But it worked, and it's possible. So for me, the summary is, sorry.
No, go ahead.
For me, the summary is SSH is the future. WinRM will probably never disappear within our lifetime. But when you set up a new infrastructure, when you do new stuff, do SSH, even if it's probably the harder path or use Arc.
And the way I think about it is there's a little bit of a burden to set up SSH at first, and I did all this for one machine, but everything I did, I have just in a script, and when I was crunched for time, I was just pasting from that script, and I have that script that will go and set it up for me on remote machines. So building this out is a one-time investment to build out the enablement, right? And if that's going to give you a lot more of a feature-rich execution environment, or I'd say execution channel, right? That's worth the investment. And again, nothing new is coming to WinRM. There's a question in the chat: is 2016 also supported? So for SSH, we support anything inbox for 2018 and newer. So
server 2018.
So anything that's 2018 or newer. So server 2019 is supported, and I think that's Windows Client 10 is also inbox. If you look at our GitHub, which is I can throw in the chat after I get our link, so I'll just pull it up and bear with me. But if you look at our GitHub, we support basically anything that's any supported Windows version, and so you just won't have it inbox. You'll just have to, I'd say, install it yourself. And so I'm posting here. So here, that's our GitHub page. So again, 2016 is supported via our GitHub releases. It's not supported via like Microsoft support or Windows support inbox. But we support all supported versions of Windows via our GitHub release. And if you look at our releases, they're marked as beta. So the only reason they're marked as beta is because we have to have it marked as not a GA release for support reasons, because it doesn't go into that same support avenue. And we're talking with Windows right now about how do we change kind of that shipping avenue, or basically or really even the versions of Windows that we ship in, and even backporting to older versions of Windows. But that's, I'd say, Windows discussions, and that's not as open source as really the rest of the PowerShell environment, so I can't really go into those conversations. But those talks are happening.
Any other questions? Still 13 people online. That's great. Okay, no questions so far.
And even if there's not questions today, I'm happy to, I'd say, you can message me on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on GitHub. I don't think GitHub has options of messaging, but you can leave an issue on GitHub and we'll answer. Or there's still the PowerShell community call. It's referred to as like normally the PowerShell community call, but it really is PowerShell and OpenSSH community call. So even if you have a question there, I am there to answer this question.
What's the link? It's aka.ms/
I think it's like PS call. I think aka.ms/PS.
Maybe you can paste the link here. It's really open for everybody. So just jump in, go to the website and register for the call. It's monthly on a Thursday.
The third Thursday of every month. And so that is in 2 days.
Yeah, we learn new stuff from the PowerShell team, what's coming up, and so really interesting. So whenever I have time, I join. Great. So we have 4 minutes to go. So thank you for the link. You will paste in a few seconds. Thank you very much, Dennis. So you spent the time with us. That's fantastic. I hope everybody learned something and you have new infos on where you want to go with remoting. Patrick did also some advertising on events in the chat. So yeah, go for it. And
Patrick, he beat me.
yeah, Join P is called. Yeah, that's the link. And yeah, for the next quarter, we are planning to do this session with Baki. We are just organizing it. Again, thank you everybody for joining in. It was fun, and we will post a recording on the Experts Live website. See you next time, and have a good day, Danny, and have a nice evening, everybody else.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you very
much.
much. Bye.